Thank you. Thank you so much, Khenpo, for giving us this opportunity to help us learn more about the relationship between mental health and the Dharma. The first few questions are more about you personally. The first question is, how did you become interested in Buddhism? How long have you been practicing the Dharma? And when did you become ordained?
Well, actually, my interest in Buddhism has been there since I was very young. This is related to my family background. My parents were both Buddhists. In the Tibetan region, 99% of people are Buddhist. So I was born into a Buddhist family in the Tibetan region. My faith has been with me since childhood. From the moment I came into this world, I've had great joy and faith in the Dharma. I was ordained in 1985. This year marks exactly 40 years. Over these 40 years, I'm now 63, so I was ordained at age 23. So in my life, roughly 2/3 of my time has been spent as a monastic.
So you've been interested in Buddhism since birth?
Yes, since birth.
Or perhaps even in the womb?
I can't say for sure about the womb, I don't really know. But that was in the 1960s. I was born in 1962, so it was quite a special time. Perhaps in the womb it would have been difficult. Hearing Buddha's name back then was quite rare and not easy. It was a special era. Also, when I was in the womb, there was a famine going on. The famine had just ended. During that famine, many people died. I'm told that my grandmother, among others, died during that famine. So religious faith was quite limited during that time.
I see. All right, the second question, what are the main teachings you practice and who are your teachers?
The teachings I practice are mainly, broadly speaking, Buddhism as a whole, Buddhism without sectarian divisions, the Dharma within Buddhism. And for my particular practice, since my ordination, I've been primarily influenced by the Nyingma tradition. My main teachers have been, in the early period, Khenpo Depa, and when I was young, before I started school, there was a Lama called Riga. He could also be considered my teacher. Later, when I arrived in Serta after my ordination in 1985, my main teacher was His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche. His kindness to me was immense. I followed him for about 19 years. After he passed away, I've been practicing, studying and exploring on my own, as well as doing some translation work until now.
All right, the next question is, what was your occupation before practicing Buddhism?
Before I practiced Buddhism, actually before I even went to school, my job was herding yaks. I didn't start elementary school until I was 15. So after I was born, I spent my time on the vast grasslands herding yaks under the blue sky and white clouds. So during my childhood, my main occupation was herding yaks. Later, during elementary and middle school, I thought about becoming a doctor or doing something else like painting. I had those thoughts too. Later, when I attended Teachers College, my career path was basically set to become a teacher. But near the end of Teachers College, I became ordained. So I can't really speak of a real career before ordination. But if I really had to say before ordination, it was either herding yaks or studying. Those were probably the two main things. When studying, I was at Teachers College, which meant becoming a teacher. I attended a secondary teachers' school, and then I've been teaching ever since. Teaching, but you could also put it this way. After Teachers College, I became ordained. From ordination until now, although I haven't been a teacher in the conventional lay sense as a monastic teacher, I've never given up teaching for 40 years. So I think that my teachers at Teachers College, who taught me worldly knowledge, their goal was to cultivate a teacher. Now, many of my classmates from Teachers College have already retired, but I haven't given up my teaching works. So even as a monastic, if we're talking about a real profession, it would probably be teaching.
And you vowed to keep teaching, right?
Yes.
All right, now we'll move on to questions more related to mental health. The first one is, how do you view mental health issues in today's world? When did you first encounter people?
Currently, there are quite a lot of people with mental health issues. When I visited the UK before, some statistics there indicated that about 1 in 6 or 7 people had mental health issues, with some in a sub-healthy state. Recently, I saw that official data from the Chinese Academy of Sciences indicated about 25% of young people are affected. That's the official statistic. The actual number may exceed that. Because most official statistics now are based only on hospital records. using registered cases as the standard. If someone hasn't been examined at a hospital, then their condition may not be known. So from a certain perspective, it seems that now there are quite a lot of people with varying degrees of depression and other mental health conditions. The numbers appear to be significant. In my daily life, I've often encountered many people, especially those living in cities in the Han region. They tend to have, to varying degrees, various mental pressures, burdens, attachments, and resentments. At such times, their mental state becomes unhealthy. Especially in extreme cases, if you mention just a little something like, I'm not too happy with this place, or I'm not too happy with this person, if you just mention the name of the county or region where they live, they become angry and start speaking irrationally. This is a kind of reaction that goes beyond normal patterns. It's understandable if someone has specific complaints about a particular person, or if there's a particular grievance between them. That's understandable. But some people, just upon hearing the name of an entire place, will say, this is the place of my nightmares, or this is the place I despise most in my life. So their psychological resilience doesn't quite fit normal patterns. I often encounter people like this.
I see. In your daily life, how many visitors do you typically meet? For example, each day, aside from your regular work, do you have much contact with followers?
I don't have that much contact with followers. Even when I do, the time spent with them isn't very long. For instance, when dozens or hundreds of people come, they request blessings. In such cases, things are quite hurried. They line up and I give them blessings with scripture texts. Then it's done. So it's hard to understand each person's mental state. There's no time to communicate with each one individually. My days are spent translating and teaching, along with various other matters. But among those I do meet, I've noticed that quite a few seem to have these issues. This includes Tibetan people as well. For Tibetans in the past, terms like depression or autism, they couldn't even name them. They would just vaguely say, I have heart problems. Basically, they felt emotionally unwell, but now with medical analysis, these are classified as various psychological syndromes or autism. These conditions exist among Tibetans too, so I encounter many people, but those I've had deep conversations with aren't that many. I haven't specifically researched people with mental health issues, interviewing many people and gathering detailed information. I've never done that. If I did, the numbers would likely be very high.
So they really hope for your blessing. How do you view this? People traveling from very far away hoping for your blessing. What's your perspective on this?
There are probably various situations. Some come with very sincere devotion. Generally, in the Tibetan region, ordinary people traditionally have liked receiving longevity, empowerments, head blessings, and other blessings. So now, including this traditional custom, many people in the Han region also particularly like receiving empowerments and head blessings. In the West, too, quite a number of people also like to line up for empowerments and blessings. So from my personal perspective, they probably have various purposes. Some have physical illness and want a blessing. Some have mental distress and want a blessing. Some perhaps through the internet and various channels have received some teachings or heard some dharma. This may have created a positive impression in their hearts, and so they come to pay a visit. Some come simply because they've heard of someone's reputation. When others are lining up to see someone, they think, I'll go too. They don't really have a specific purpose. They just follow along. But some indeed may understand that in Buddhism, this is another way to form a connection with Dharma teachers. Their purposes may vary, but generally speaking, each person has some kind of faith in their heart. It's because of this faith that they behave this way. So whether it's from the spirit of Confucius in ancient China, where respect for teachers was highly valued, or in Buddhism, where we approach things with reverence, I see this in the secular world too. For instance, some people, when they often see singers or celebrities, if there's an opportunity somewhere, they'll go to see them too, take a photo or shake hands. This is something people aspire to. Whether in the East or West, this seems to be a common pursuit for many people, or perhaps a shared pattern of behavior. Although, if we examine with true wisdom, some of this is meaningful, while some may seem superstitious. But regardless, this phenomenon exists in our world.
So you understand them well. Even when you're tired, you still try to accommodate them.
Yes, that's right, because it's not easy for anyone. They spend their own time to pay a visit or meet someone. I myself in the past, for instance, in my life, I've met some great masters and some teachers. At those times, comparing my feelings then to now, I can relate. Especially, I once went to a place. At that time, it was arranged by Larungar for certain matters. That teacher was in retreat. We waited a long time. Sometimes I felt a bit frustrated and very tired. That kind of feeling. So I think, regardless, all people share certain common feelings and experiences.
Thank you so much. The next question is, when you communicate with those who have mental health issues or psychological difficulties, during your exchanges with them, what kind of practices or Buddhist concepts do you usually share with them? What do you find most helpful for them?
When I communicate with them, I often look at the person's mental state and analyze accordingly. Because generally, when a doctor prescribes medicine, they first take the pulse and observe the patient's overall condition and understand all aspects of the illness. This is true in Chinese medicine and Tibetan medicine. Actually, it's the same in Buddhist teachings. Teaching according to the individual's capacity, this is very important because each person's point of attachment is different. So for people with various mental conditions, if I have time, I try to analyze what troubles them most or what they find hardest to accept. Then, based on the individual, I teach accordingly. For some, I might talk to them about altruism. Perhaps their selfish mind is binding them, so this approach might help. Some people are particularly attached to a certain person or status, and this attachment becomes like a cocoon trapping them. For such people, I try to explain to them the concept of non-self in more depth, but some people may not be able to accept this. In those cases, I simply suggest they recite the name of Akshobhya Buddha or do purification practice with the Vajrasattva mantra. So generally, I don't take a one-size-fits-all approach. Different analyses do seem to help them, because each person's point of suffering or the nature of their mental distress, the source of that distress, their current situation and the focus of their attachment all differ. So in this regard, if we analyze carefully, it can sometimes make a significant difference.
Wonderful, wonderful. Teaching according to the individual's capacity. In Buddhism, this is called teaching according to capacity. From a medical or psychological perspective, it means prescribing different practices and methods based on their different symptoms. Wonderful. In this process, among the teachings you most commonly give them, which particular teaching do you use most often?
Because I often, whether answering questions or in general, for instance, we visited many schools before. Students and teachers at many schools often raise questions like, I can't let go of something in my mind, or they have complaints or resentment towards someone. This gradually becomes like a tumor. It turns into that. So what I teach most often is for them to look into Buddhist methods for training the mind. For example, Chapter 8 of The Way of the Bodhisattva discusses meditation. Meditation can completely relax their minds. The mind is naturally quite rigid. This self-centered attachment can be released through meditation, or, as explained in Chapter 9, the Wisdom chapter of The Way of the Bodhisattva, analyzing the self of persons and the self of phenomena. If someone has higher wisdom, this becomes quite easy gradually. If that's not suitable, then, as illustrated in the Sutra of 100 Karmas, for those with strong attachment to the opposite gender, I share some stories to illustrate the point. For example, there's a story of a person whose spouse died, but even after death he remained so attached that he carried the corpse on his shoulders. Eventually the body decomposed into a skeleton, yet he still clung to it. In fact, in our real lives, many people's attachments are quite similar to this. So, depending on the person I encounter, I share Buddhist meditation practices, the view of non-self or other practices and methods of guidance. I tell them simple stories to illustrate. Some people, it's like a ripe fruit ready to drop. With just a slight touch, they immediately open up. There was once a university student who had been tormented in his mind for many years by something very painful. But after hearing some Dharma teachings, he only listened for 1 hour, and then he understood. Once he understood, he was completely freed. What had originally been very painful. Once he opened his mind, all those points of suffering from before became neither harmful nor helpful to him. So sometimes when conditions are ripe, this can be very effective.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Do you also share with them, aside from Buddhist teachings? In your communication with them, are there things that aren't so explicitly Buddhist, but rather your own insights, perhaps from your years of practice, that don't have such a strong Buddhist flavor, other ideas or wisdom? Do you share those with them?
When I speak with them, actually, I probably share more Buddhist teachings. I personally believe the Dharma is most effective. At the same time, some people aren't interested in Buddhism and don't have any religious faith. For such people, I suggest they read some psychology books. Because psychology, whether metaphysical or empirical, any branch of psychology doesn't analyze things as precisely as the Dharma does. When I was at Teachers College, I also read some psychology, including Jungian psychology and Freudian psychology. I read some of these, but while reading them, I had many doubts at the time. Later, after I became ordained and studied the Abhidharmakosha, especially the Abhidharmakosha, among the 51 mental factors, there are 20 secondary afflictions. These 20 secondary afflictions describe the mind's states, both positive and negative. Among the negative ones, for example, the 5 root afflictions like attachment, anger, and ignorance. And among the 20 secondary afflictions, anger, rage, resentment, deceit, when I analyzed and understood each one, I found it particularly meaningful. So depending on the situation, on one hand, I encourage them to explore psychology, as well as current brain science and neuroscience. These can help them with their emotions, so they can learn from these fields. At the same time, I also gradually recommend to them insights I've gained from Buddhism.
Thank you. Very good. The next question is, which teachings and methods of interaction have you found most effective for them? In what settings do you usually communicate with them? Is it mainly one-on-one or with a group? Could you share some particularly memorable examples?
I can't think of any right now, specific, particularly memorable examples, but generally, for instance, after giving a talk at a university, each school has an interactive Q&A session when they ask questions. Although only one person asks, many others seem to relate. So when I answer for everyone together, it seems some people benefit as well. I remember once we were in Hong Kong at the Polytechnic University, I believe. We talked about how to overcome afflictions. During the interactive session, many people's mental health issues were illustrated through case examples. Everyone seemed to find it meaningful. Some people at the time raised quite targeted questions. When I communicated with them, the exchange went quite well. Sometimes there are also face-to-face meetings, including with some psychology professors. When we were in Colorado, some professors there were interested in this area. When speaking with them, they mentioned that some of their students also had similar troubles. So we communicated through one-on-one or group settings. In some cases it worked quite well. When we were in Thailand, we also engaged with different religions, including Christianity, Islam, as well as Confucianism and Taoism. We communicated together with people from different religions about how the mind can pursue happiness and how to purify negative emotions. It seemed that each religion has its own perspectives to share. When they shared them, actually, different paths lead to the same destination. In some ways, they basically understand the root of negative emotions. Some religions are quite good at this, but I personally believe that ultimately one must understand one's own mind, because the sufferer is the mind, and what binds us is also the mind, whether from the perspective of secular psychology or through the analysis of Mahayana Buddhism. If a person can truly find this mind that experiences suffering, if they can find this mind, then many problems may already be solved. If the fundamental nature of this mind isn't recognized, then worldly suffering is boundless and hard to bring to an end.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next question is, you probably don't encounter this, but I'll still ask. If your help to someone doesn't achieve the outcome you expected, you thought it would really help them, but it didn't turn out that way. Do you feel discouraged? What do you think when this happens? Have you experienced this?
Perhaps a little, but generally I don't feel greatly discouraged, because I also know that anything in this world, just because I want to do it, doesn't mean it will succeed exactly as planned. This is true anywhere throughout history. Everyone has their own beautiful wishes and ideals, but actually to realize them there are various difficulties. For example, when nurturing someone, that person at a certain point may not only fail to develop, but instead become the biggest obstacle to me. This kind of situation happens whether training students or in the process of teaching the Dharma. Originally, this person might have benefited themselves and others greatly, but later during the whole process, things go contrary to our wishes, not only unrealized, but they may even affect your endeavors and your work. In such situations, how do we face it? Actually, we can only respond with a pure heart or a heart free of resentment. Beyond that, there's probably no other way. Everything depends on causes and conditions arising and ceasing. When conditions are complete, anything can manifest. When conditions aren't complete, things cannot manifest.
Thank you for sharing this real situation. The next question. You may not encounter this either, but I'll still ask. When people who are suffering or in great psychological pain share their pain and struggles with you, their intense emotions, does empathizing with them affect your own mood, making you feel down or sad or even a sense of helplessness? If so, how do you handle it? If not, what gives you such strong mental resilience?
Actually, because everyone, no matter who they are, may be affected to some degree, especially when around you appears someone in great pain or someone in a helpless situation. Sometimes this happens. For example, when we regularly sponsor students from impoverished backgrounds, because this year's quota is already full just yesterday, our student sponsorship program, the entire year's quota was already full. But a mother and child in dire circumstances came to see me. At that point, I could only, since the entire fund couldn't help them personally on my own. But at that moment, I also saw the family's entire situation, including her, how should I put it, her expression, her condition. It was quite pitiful. Some people may be seriously ill. Some are on the verge of mental breakdown. That happens too. Some people's financial situations are extremely difficult, owing a lot of debt. But these people, after all, we're human. When they share these things, we're also affected. Sometimes we can't help them either, because we can't possibly help everyone in the world with their inner and outer poverty. We can't help all of them. But even when I can't help, I help as much as I can within my ability. I try not to let my mind be affected by external circumstances. If I also become consumed by their suffering and dwell on it, that probably wouldn't be helpful. Moreover, in this world, many things arise due to causes and conditions. So when conditions aren't complete, no matter what we do, it's hard to change the fate of other beings. So sometimes, as the saying goes, pitiable people often have their own faults. Perhaps they didn't make enough effort in this life and created much negative karma in past lives. So this life's consequences have come about. Sometimes I hope they can engage in purification themselves. As for myself, without regret or difficulty, I do what I can within my ability.
Very good. Thank you so much. The next question is, what are your thoughts on Buddhist practitioners helping people with mental health issues? How do you view this matter?
Actually, I think there are two types of mental illness in today's world. One type may be due to very heavy karma created in past lives. For example, having caused the death of other beings or intentionally killed other beings, causing them boundless anger. For this type, these karmic conditions have now ripened upon us in this life. Even the Dharma may have difficulty addressing this. But there's another group. Due to various circumstances, they've developed anxiety and suffering in their minds. For such people, if the profound principles of the Dharma are used to guide them, I believe many people can be saved through this. Someone I knew before said that if he hadn't encountered the Dharma, he would have already taken his own life. Many people probably share similar experiences. In our Buddhist community, what was their situation? Their entire business had collapsed. Various problems arose at home. Their children were disobedient. When they shared their stories, it was quite heartbreaking. But because they systematically studied the Dharma, gradually they freed themselves from their suffering. So I believe if the Dharma is truly practiced, it can save many people.
All right, thank you. The next question is, why do you think some people with mental illness don't seek help from professional psychological counselors, but instead turn to the Dharma for help?
It's not that they don't go. Some people do frequently visit psychological counseling centers. Some people I've met with mental health issues have sought help everywhere, from spiritual practices, psychological counseling, Chinese medicine, psychologists, all kinds of help. Of course, this also depends on one's disposition. Some people who have an affinity with the Dharma may eventually find salvation through the Dharma, because the Dharma's perspective may seem quite strange. You give up your self-centeredness to help others. Generally speaking, this seems hard to put into practice because we're self-centered. Nowadays, people often talk about loving yourself. But actually, our way of loving ourselves is somewhat mistaken. The more we love ourselves, the more we suffer. Conversely, if we love others, we ourselves are actually saved. So this is a rather interesting principle. So in the Dharma, it may seem like, for example, in Chinese medicine, if you have a heat condition, for a heat condition, you should use cold remedies to treat it. But some skilled doctors for a heat condition may prescribe hot medicine, fighting fire with fire, or use another targeted approach. This way, results come quickly. So actually, in many cases, the relationship between remedy and affliction is quite subtle. There's a profound principle at work. So I think in Buddhism, actually, many of its approaches are somewhat similar to worldly medicine. It has its own unique function or unique benefit.
All right. Thank you. The next question is, among people with mental health issues, what commonalities do you see in their experiences? Or do people of different ages with mental health issues have different causes? Or do you think their mental health problems are caused by some common factors?
As I mentioned earlier, most people nowadays, whether elderly, middle-aged or young, share a common cause. People with mental health issues today are extremely attached to themselves. Add to this the images in movies and TV today that present a particularly beautiful external world. Whether it's your career, wealth, or your partner, everything is portrayed as successful, living happily ever after, enjoying life. But in reality, people can't achieve this. So there's a huge gap between their beautiful vision and their actual situation. When they can't bridge this gap, it builds up in their minds, accumulating again and again. Then many conflicts and suffering arise. So I think many people today, regardless of gender or age, in many people's minds, it's the self-grasping and the gap they can't let go of. If people can't untangle their mindset gradually, the world also changes for them. If the mind opens up, the world is beautiful. If the mind can't open up, even if you live in paradise, your mind will be filled with extreme anxiety and pains. So from the Dharma's perspective, many people today, aside from the rare cases of karma from past lives causing their condition, most people are too attached to emotions, too attached to wealth, too attached to status. Add to this that these things they're attached to are beyond their reach. When they can't obtain them, all kinds of external pressures come flooding in. Eventually, people become buried in a pile of pressure. They can't stand up. Gradually, they begin to collapse and deteriorate. At a certain point, they may lose even the basic courage to live. Things get worse and worse. Eventually, some people leave this world. So if mental health issues today aren't properly understood, it's really a pity. So I encourage them to study the Heart Sutra, to study Prajnaparamita, to study Madhyamaka. This way, first understand that all these things we cling to so tightly are actually mere imputations. If you fundamentally understand this principle, these things I've been clinging to are actually not so real after all. Just like a child who is extremely attached to a toy. They cry and make a fuss, even wanting to harm themselves. But from an adult's perspective, it's just a toy after all. Even if you get it, that's all it is. So there's no need to cry, no need for self-harms. So I think ultimately it's related to this sense of self. At this point, if we understand the principle of emptiness, especially if we understand dependent arising, when conditions gather, things arise. When conditions disperse, they dissolve. This principle for everyone may be of some benefit.
That's wonderful. Analyzing both the internal cause and the external, the perception of the external world.
Yes, internally people desperately want things, but externally things aren't as easy as the mind imagines. So when they can't get what they want, they resent the world and the people around them. Many people today are attached to romantic feelings, but actually emotional attachment, it's not that others feel the same way you do. Others have their own psychological struggles, all kinds of them. So these two don't go according to one's wishes. The whole world doesn't revolve around you. The entire world, whether the external material world or the inner world of sentient beings, everything is in a state like a flowing river. It constantly flows with a driving force. This driving force, even others may sometimes have no control over it. Material things also have no control. My own wish is for my family to be happy, for my material wealth to be abundant. But material things have their own causes and conditions. A family has 4 or 5 people. A child who doesn't listen has their own causes and conditions. Family members who don't cooperate have their own causes and conditions. Everything exists in a state of ever-changing causes and conditions, constantly moving forward. When this happens, you suffer greatly if you insist that things must follow your own design. Some things are just unrealistic. So in Buddhism, we often speak of going with conditions. Going with conditions is very important.
Wonderful, wonderful. Especially like what you mentioned a few days ago about fantasies. The fantasies and illusions born of craving. When they can't be realized, the suffering is extreme.
Yes, craving is actually quite frightening. It's a fantasy, a particularly beautiful paradise. But this paradise you fantasize about may not be attainable. The gap from reality is very large. The reason for this gap can't entirely be blamed on others. Whether it's your own causes and conditions or others' causes and conditions, and among various events, there are all kinds of complex causes and conditions. Only when these conditions come together can you obtain what you wish for. So in our world today, among many people, very few actually get what they wished for. It's just a phrase, that's all.
Yes, yes, yes. So insightful. Right. Thank you. The next question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge or difficulty in helping people with mental health issues?
Helping people with mental health issues, the biggest challenge for them, right?
In this process, what do you think is the biggest challenge or difficulty? Why is it so hard to help people with mental health issues?
Actually, I think it requires perseverance, because with any endeavor, when we encounter difficulties, we can't just abandon it. Whatever it is, whether driving or walking, everything will have some difficulties along the way. But when there are difficulties, we should persist. Once you've chosen this path or chosen to do this thing, then you must have a courageous, forward-moving attitude. This way, challenges can be overcome. Especially for people with mental health issues, they're quite pitiable. They themselves may not even care about their own bodies. They may want to take their own life or even want to kill the person they once loved most. They may also disregard their friends and family, disregarding everything, including themselves. Originally, they had a sense of shame, but when mental illness strikes, they become shameless. They might even run naked in public. So people with mental illness are truly pitiable. If you're a practitioner of Mahayana Buddhism, no matter what criticism from others or whatever else, you can accept it. You wholeheartedly want to help them. If you have genuine altruism in your heart, you'll try to face all challenges. If one approach doesn't work, try another. Just like a mother who has deep love for her child. Before her child's illness is cured, she'll seek doctors, seek divinations, try all kinds of methods. She keeps trying. Before she herself passes away, she'll try every possible way to cure her child's illness. So in Mahayana Buddhism, one should have, no matter what one encounters, an attitude of leaping over obstacles. This kind of mindset, regarding this matter on one hand, you completely accept others' afflictions and suffering. At the same time, you persist in your efforts throughout the process.
All right, thank you. The next question is, do you think people with a Buddhist background would, through this kind of help, more easily improve and recover? Would it be harder for those without a Buddhist background? For someone with no Buddhist background at all, would directly receiving Buddhist principles or practices be more difficult?
Not necessarily, because some principles in Buddhism and some people may not have faith, but when these principles are explained to them, for example, non-self, if non-self is explained well, because non-self is about reasoning, not about faith. When we analyze through reasoning, indeed, the so-called composite self, although everyone says I exist, when we truly examine, the self doesn't exist. At that point, self-grasping diminishes. When self-grasping diminishes, suffering also diminishes. For such people, whether they have a Buddhist background or not, if you explain directly and straightforwardly, they can immediately accept it. If you try to convince others based on faith alone, it may be easier to guide those who have faith. If they don't have a faith background, it's not easy to guide them. But some principles in Buddhism are not merely about faith, because those who achieve realization through faith are of duller capacity. Those who achieve through wisdom are of sharper capacity. So among some people with mental illness, among patients and others, some have excellent wisdom. They truly have the ability to analyze and examine. Their logical thinking is very strong and orderly, but because they've been affected by their illness, they're unable to think clearly. If you engage their logic, they fundamentally realize what I was clinging to was an illusion. For example, someone holding onto an empty box, once they finally discover it's empty at least, they may have some habitual tendencies, but at least they'll gradually let it go. Very helpful. So among the people I've encountered, sometimes I notice some seem to respond even better than Buddhists, non-Buddhists from outside. They can immediately untie their mental knots. Once the mind opens, it's like dawn breaking. They immediately awaken and realize such cases do occur.
Thank you, thank you. The next question is, which Buddhist theories or scriptures directly address the causes of mental health issues and methods to resolve them?
I think texts like the Buddhist Abhidharma, the higher and lower Abhidharma, are excellent. That is the Abhidharma Kosha, the Abhidharma Kosha's analysis of the mind. When I was at Teachers College, I was also interested in psychology, but later I saw that Buddhist psychology analyzes things extremely well. At the same time, if someone has somewhat higher capacity, they can study texts like Finding Comfort and Ease in the Nature of Mind. This text is about how the mind can find rest, because our weary minds are extremely overworked in this world with clinging and attachment and so on. I think one is finding comfort and ease in the nature of mind, especially the Udana Sutra. I'm currently teaching the Inspired Utterances. This teaching is wonderful. It covers the view of impermanence regarding this world, attachment, anger, including understanding through hearing the Dharma, because many people today don't understand the true nature of this world. I remember, fools lacking wisdom act as if they'll never die. There's a verse like this: fools, because they lack wisdom, everyone is heading toward death, but many people don't realize at all when they will die. At this point, the wise have wisdom. The wise realize the sublime Dharma. The wise, they completely understand these principles and so forth. Using such principles for analysis, I think especially the Udana Sutra, from the Shravakayana perspective, analyzing all phenomena is very important. Texts like the Bodhisattva Bhumi, the Shiksha Samukaya, and the Way of the Bodhisattva, they approach from the Mahayana perspective, from the perspective of benefiting others, analyzing the state of one's own mind. If people study these, it should greatly reduce the number of people with mental illness.
Are there any deeper tantric teachings regarding the brain and our mind? In this regard?
Actually, in the tantric teachings, there is some analysis of the brain and examination of the body. These exist. But more importantly, Buddhism primarily examines through the mind, because whether it's materialism or many people in the world, they believe our worldly suffering comes from various pathological changes in the brain, which then cause various worries and anxieties. We don't deny this. There may be some truth to it, but fundamentally, Buddhism's fundamental approach is through the mind. So if we're talking about the mind, of course, the 17 tantras of Dzogchen, the 7 treasuries, these also discuss it. More importantly, in Dzogchen, there are teachings for truly recognizing one's own nature of mind. At that point, many of the afflictions I mentioned earlier are naturally resolved. Afflictions are Bodhi itself. When one understands this principle, one's nature is inherently pure. This is very important.
Another question. Although it seems clear that the Dharma is very effective for resolving mental health issues, why do some people say that some Dharma practitioners later develop mental health issues or even serious mental problems? How do you view this situation?
Regarding this, generally among Buddhists, the probability is not high. The numbers are few. Indeed, among Buddhist practitioners, such cases, proportionally speaking, are not many. But even if there are occasional cases, it's not particularly strange. For example, I recently saw a prominent stroke specialist in China who ultimately died from that very disease himself. In China, there have been some famous, for example, liver disease specialists who spent their whole lives treating others' liver diseases and ultimately died from liver disease themselves. In the secular world, there are also rare cases like this. So in Buddhism, most succeed in saving others through Buddhist truths. Just like in worldly hospitals, because one specialist died, a liver specialist who got liver disease, it would be unrealistic for no one to see doctors anymore. People still see doctors as usual. By the same logic, I think among practitioners, some may not have practiced according to proper guidelines. Some may have karmic forces from past lives that no one can avoid when the time comes, so they may pass away too. But in general, we've often seen recently that some good Buddhist practitioners may have physical illness or other issues, but they themselves experience no suffering from it, or they manifest illness before sentient beings. So I always feel that in this world, using one incident to judge all other things isn't very reasonable. For example, among monastics, if a monk from a certain monastery disrobes, that doesn't mean all monastics are bad. If one teacher at a school embezzles, does that mean all teachers and students at all schools are bad? We can't say that. So perhaps anywhere there are good and bad, but the bad ones represent only a few individuals. If we analyze in detail, they also have their own various causes and conditions. And if we analyze further, perhaps what others spread isn't accurate, because with news and rumors, sometimes seeing is believing, hearing may be false. Such situations exist. So for some matters, perhaps we need to analyze specific issues specifically to get accurate results.
Due to time constraints, this is the last question. Could you offer some advice to those who are currently, there are quite many now, working on interdisciplinary research between mental health and Buddhism, both domestically and internationally? There are actually quite many. What suggestions do you have in this area? What thoughts do you have that might be helpful for us? Something that could help us?
Actually, my suggestion is, whether it's psychological science, brain science, or neuroscience, these are all great fields. They've made tremendous contributions to human society. But compared to Buddhism, perhaps regarding the mind, science has not yet fully understood it. Because whether it's their equipment or their methods of observation, they mainly focus on the body and the external material world. As for the true state of the mind, the classification of mental states, the origins of the mind, the origins of various emotions, their analysis of these is minimal. So my suggestion would be that for those working on the dialogue between mental health and Buddhism, they should first learn more about what Buddhism teaches. If they understand these Buddhist principles, they'll realize that compared to much of secular psychology, although it's called psychology in name actually, even our simple Pratimoksha or the Vinaya texts, analysis of the mind isn't yet extremely thorough, not to mention the Mahayana and even higher teachings, like within the Mahayana, the Yogacara school, which also examines the mind. All phenomena are mind only. Going even higher, like the nature of mind discussed in Dzogchen, these are still very far from being understood. So my thought is, if people truly want to research this area in the future, perhaps first learn more, spend more time understanding how Buddhism analyzes the mind. Over 2,500 years ago, whether in the Tantras or in the Sutras, it was already extremely thorough. At that point, we may also come to understand when problems arise in our own minds, when issues emerge, what is the primary root cause. Once someone has anxiety or depression, what methods can address it? There's analysis in this regard. If so, it may be easier to understand. Otherwise, it's like a chronic illness. Taking medicine once or twice simply won't solve the problem. So as a skilled doctor, they understand the ins and outs of each illness, as well as its current state, analyzing with great detail and precision. After analysis, they prescribe medicine and provide treatment. So I think this is actually very interesting. I'm also very keen to engage with people in brain science, neuroscience, especially psychologists. We've previously been to places like Sydney and elsewhere in Australia. We also met some psychology experts there. They were analyzing the current psychological state of their students. We also discussed how Buddhism understands and analyzes the mind, these methods. During our exchange, we found much common ground. Everyone has certain areas they haven't yet crossed into. If one crosses into a new territory, if one truly looks at one's own mind, when looking at one's own mind, many people may not be like before. Regarding their mindset, at least they can let go. Once the mind lets go, all the suffering and disasters of the external world immediately transform. If not, as I mentioned earlier, even if all external conditions are perfectly met, the inner turmoil remains impossible to untangle. This phenomenon is becoming more and more common. So in this world, wealth, status, beauty, these are what people pursue and they're good. But more importantly, what we may need is a particularly healthy mindset. This healthy mindset comes from continuously training in Buddhist meditation, training in the Buddhist view of non-self, training in altruism. This way, naturally, a person's mind becomes pure and clean, operating in a relatively normal way. Such people, just today I met someone. She kept crying with a child beside her. She said, "My husband had an affair. So now I can't eat during the day, like can't sleep at night. I'm in so much pain." I saw how thin and pitiful she looked. I told her, "In this world, besides your husband, there are many others. If you want to find someone, you should first take care of yourself. Don't torment yourself. If you keep insisting on clinging to this, you'll destroy yourself." I noticed the little girl kept playing with her phone. She probably didn't sense it. Sometimes she'd look at me, sometimes at her mother's tears, then go back to playing with her phone. I said, "Actually, you two, mother and daughter, and on one hand are pitiable, but on the other hand, you can still carry on with life. Actually, this mainly comes from your attachment." I said, from our perspective, this doesn't seem like such a serious matter. In today's world, it's actually quite a normal occurrence. You don't need to suffer so much." She seemed slightly relieved, but I don't know how things will turn out. Hard to say. So I think right now there's a crucial threshold. If people can't get over it, they may choose suicide, resent society, or even contract a contagious disease and then blame society doing many harmful things. This phenomenon is becoming more and more common, mainly because in our schools, mental health education is quite lacking. Then when they grow up and see the dazzling external world, the whole person becomes broken. Once a person is broken, their children and parents are all directly or indirectly affected. So in today's society, we Tibetans have a saying, even without money, it's okay, as long as you have a healthy mind. Even without anything else, it's okay, as long as you have a healthy mind. I've seen some people in prison living quite happily. They have nothing and their situation is terrible, yet their mindset remains quite normal. So although we're outside in a world of freedom, sometimes if the mind is already in shackles, one can never break free. That too is pitiable. Many people now, well, today they're better, tomorrow they're not again. Some people today are perfectly normal, completely ordinary, nothing wrong. Tomorrow they're completely mad. When mad, they're even worse than a rampaging elephant in India. A rampaging Indian elephant tramples and destroys everything in sight. These people can't stand anything they see or hear.
And some people seem to have recovered, but later relapse. What's the reason for this?
Their recovery wasn't actually a recovery. Deep down in their minds, it was just temporarily suppressed. As I said earlier, with just a slight touch or trigger, it immediately erupts, just like before. They haven't actually fully healed. It was just temporarily suppressed for a while. When triggered again, it becomes even more intense, even more frightening. So the teachings of Buddhism always aim to help beings understand. When the mind is at peace, all is at peace. When the mind is at peace, all is joy. As long as the mind settles, all is joyful. But this settling of the mind, put simply, it's quite simple. Just observe your own mind. Your own mind is nowhere to be found. No color, no shape, no essence. Then why should I suffer? A while ago, I posted on social media that many people today promote self-love. But with self-love, does this love exist? Does the I exist? If the I doesn't exist, what are you loving? But many people, well, they seem to appreciate it. About hundreds of thousands of people liked it. The point is, most crucially, we do love ourselves, but we don't know how to love ourselves. They don't understand how to love themselves, how to love. They think always guarding themselves is perhaps the best way to love. Actually, it's not. The more we let go, the more we gain happiness. This is the key.